The idea of stubbornly independent is about the nature of independent filmmaking that doesn't follow some kind of a pre-planned focus group narrative.
To paraphrase Fleetwood Mac, they're going to go their own way.
An uncompromising spirit.
The willingness to do whatever it takes to make it happen.
It's what I've been since I was born.
You have to be stubborn to make it nowadays.
Being stubbornly independent is at the core of Tallgrass.
We're going to do this. We're going to throw a world-renowned festival in the heart of Wichita.
They're going to bring the programming that they want, and they're not going to be overly informed or driven by outside sources.
We're going to make it work with what we've got.
And by gosh, we're going to do it. We're going to have a good time.
The idea that we can put on this massive festival in and of itself is stubbornly independent.
To be stubbornly independent, I think, is to say this story needs to be told.
If you want what you're making as an indie to be seen, you've got to have that chip on your shoulder.
And so it's that I will make it happen attitude.
Tallgrass has never shied away from important and controversial stories, even when it has cost us support. That's the importance of being stubbornly independent.
They're not going to be told what to do, and I respect that.
My sister, Ann, called me and said, Emily, there's this guy coming over to my house and I don't want to meet with him. I said, okay, I'll grab my lunch and I'll be over. And it was Tim.
Came into my office one afternoon and sat down and, got very close and...
We had been after him to come back to Wichita for several years because he was just, on holidays, he would fly over us to Boston.
My boss at the time did not want to meet with this gentleman who had begged him for an appointment. So he said, Terry, I want you to meet with him, and he wants to start a film festival in Wichita.
He started telling me the idea about how he wanted to start this film festival, that he had been involved in festivals in LA, and I sat there the whole time with a background in events going, this is never going to work in Wichita.
And he wondered if I thought that it would work. I basically told him, well, I think it's a good idea. The only way we'll know is if you do it.
We chatted with him for a long time, and he was so enthusiastic. He had a very clear vision. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, and he wanted to know if I wanted to be on the board. And I said, let me think about this. After he left, Jake and I looked at each other and went, that guy's crazy.
At one point during the conversation, he got a call from somebody, what are you doing, or something, and Tim's response was, well, I'm sitting with my new best friend, Ann Keeper. And I thought, this guy is so full of it, but he's adorable. So at the end of the hour, I said, all right, let's do this. We'll see what happens.
His passion was infectious, and if you were fortunate enough to hear one of his sometimes insane ideas, you'd leave convinced it was all possible and that you needed to be involved.
It was hard to just guess whether Wichita would be receptive to a film festival, but we were both open to see what would happen, and I agreed to be on the board. And I was really glad I did.
My mom was reading Wichita Eagle one morning and she called me down and she said, Tyler, there's this article about this guy coming back to Wichita from Los Angeles to start a film festival. You should get in touch with him. I send an email to Tim. Tim called me within 15 minutes of me sending the email and he said, when can you come up to the office? I said, right now, because it was summer vacation. What else was I doing? I went up to the office up at the Garvey Center. He immediately put me to work in the office up there. In very short order, Tim became a very, very close and dear friend and my first mentor in the industry.
Tim Gruber was a former boss of mine from LA Film Fest. He had become one of my good friends after I had moved to LA from Boston, and he showed me so much about Los Angeles and taught me a lot about the entertainment industry.
I met Tim Gruber, who founded Tallgrass in LA. We became fast friends. In 2003, he moved back here and he was like, do you want to come to Kansas and produce this film festival? And I had no idea what that meant. And I didn't understand the value of a regional film festival. And I wanted to get out of LA. I wanted to do something different. And it just seemed like it was the right time in my life to take that gamble.
Leela and I connected at some point, looked at each other, shrugged our shoulders, and said, okay, I'll do it if you do it. Soon after, she showed up at my apartment in her Prius, and we drove to Wichita for our first time.
Amongst the board members, as we all talked in private, we were like, okay, this is a fabulous idea, but it's a little kooky, and we just think it's pretty aggressive for Wichita. And to be candid, we had some concerns about how some of the films would be accepted in the community.
It didn't really matter what the attitude of volunteers and the board was. Tim Gruber was going to make this happen.
I don't even think that I knew what I was walking into.
Tim called me up and said, hey, do you want to meet Eric and Layla? That sounds great. Yeah, great. You can help them move in. I remember we go over to the house, and I don't know who put this house up. I don't know anything about it other than the fact that we go in and it is a pit. Like somebody had just abandoned it. We can't put the two producers of the film festival in this shack, basically. My parents stepped up. They said, well, we've got tons of room at the house. Eric and Layla can stay with us.
Jake and Ann and I had been chatting about what would be a fun slogan to use for Tallgrass.
Jake had a fabulous collection of postcards, and Terry and I are flipping through them. And we come across one that most of us have seen it. It's the asses, and they're all up at the trough. The caption is, board of directors.
We just kind of started riffing off each other.
Because we were trying to come up with a tagline. Jake had been listening to our conversation for probably an hour. And he just walks out of his bedroom and walks by and says, stubbornly independent, and walks out the front door. And Terry and I both just, damn you, Jake Euchre!
And it just felt right, and has always felt right. It still does to me.
We are stubbornly independent. We had some big sponsors who thought they could maybe control us a little bit, and we kind of backed off of that and said we can do it on our own. And we did.
And the fact that it's still going 20 years later is incredibly stubbornly independent.
My mom, when she read that tagline, she goes, wow, that's you, stubbornly. But I love the concept.
I think it's really more than just a name with them. I think it's really the culture that they've established.
I think Tallgrass has been stubbornly independent from day one because Tim really was stubbornly independent. And I think he, passed that on to all of us. I know I have it tattooed on my arm, so it's forever with me.
On the board, we were never allowed to have any input on what films were being selected. They would bring out films and we would say, oh, this is a little different or odd. That's not going to bring in a lot of people. And they said, we don't care. This is a great film. We were just always so proud that they were stubbornly independent and we're going to show the films that they thought were right for this community.
Back then, the vibe, it was punk rock, but with class.
Virtually everybody that came to the festival that year probably had never been to a festival before. And so they were just trying to figure out, well, what is a film festival?
Tim's vision, he wanted to show Hollywood that Wichita has something to offer by turning Tallgrass into a filmmaker's first festival.
Filmmakers First was that we focused on the filmmakers and not so much on celebrities.
It's really about making you feel welcome, not just your film.
There's a different vibe that allows people to connect and network in a different way.
Our parties and gala events were first rate. Accommodations for incoming guests, we didn't skimp at all. With that bar being set as high as it was, the energy level was extraordinarily high. And of course, the challenges that come with that doing it your first year made the energy very hectic, but ultimately in a good way.
We had some really interesting guests. We made some really interesting mistakes. We had some really interesting triumphs.
It wasn't what Wichita was, it was what do we want Wichita to be? And so that informed so much of our decision making. I mean, some of the films that we were showing in those early years, we went there just pushing the envelope in terms of values here in Wichita. You're never prepared when it happens suddenly, and you're never prepared when it happens to somebody so young. And as old as I was, I hadn't known people who had passed that young and that suddenly and that unexpectedly. That was not a great day.
When we all got the call, we rallied that evening, that afternoon, because immediately we were just a few months out from the festival and we realized, what are we going to do?
We were all in a state of shock when Tim died. He was, I want to say, 33, and just really dropped in his tracks.
It was devastating for me.
It was so sudden and nobody expected it.
As a family, we were devastated. And we decided that we wanted to do something that could be a lasting memorial for him. And so we went out to the tree farm and bought a 10-year-old oak tree, and we had that planted in our front yard. So it's 20-some years old now, and has grown just immensely. And so it's a constant reminder to us as every time we pull into the driveway, what a huge personality Tim was, and to us still is.
Quite frankly, it was just unbelievable because, you know, how could someone this young who had just started helping us really get something going, how could he be gone that quickly?
After his funeral, we met back at the church, and the thing that really amazed us is as we introduced ourselves and talked, so many people said, you know, Tim was our best friend. And he felt that way genuinely about everybody that felt that he was his friend, because he was.
It was very tragic. I mean, losing your best friend is hard. And Eric and I happened to both be in Boston at the time, and we both got the news at the same time, so we were able to be together. And then we drove back here and hung out with our Tallgrass family.
There was concern about whether it would continue, and quite frankly, whether it could be at the level that he had in mind for it. I also thought, you know, there is something here, and we've got to somehow figure out how do we keep this going.
There are just so many people that had become a part of the festival that wanted to see it go ahead.
This community really came together after his death to ensure that another year of the festival could happen.
Everyone knew that Tim would very much want the festival to continue.
We were always of the conviction that the show must go on, and that's what Tim would have wanted.
You don't need me. Go make it happen. I gave you the formula.
And so we fought really hard, but we had the support of this amazing community of people who had only been part of it for 2 years, because this was only the third festival.
And we shortened the festival. We said, there's no way we can do a 3-day festival. So we went down to 1 day. We made it through that festival, and then year 4 was our goal. By that point, there was really no question about it. Everybody was kind of, let's do this.
The very first Tallgrass film, opening night of '03, is called Bomb the System.
A graffiti writer never expects to get caught, just like a cop never expects to get shot.
Well, the parties are always something to behold.
The Warren had just opened in Old Town, and we did a party in the garage of that building.
We ended up putting up a parking garage. There's a lot of graffiti art in the movie, and we had a lot of graffiti artists around, but
Tommy tricked the whole area out with trash cans burning with fire and the whole urban vibe.
in the movie, the scenes change colors. So throughout the night in the party, we'd have the whole parking garage change from red to blue and yellow. And you actually had to crawl through fences to get into the party because it was like breaking into spray paint the sides of trains. And
Get out of this movie about graffiti and go next door and party in a garage the way the graffiti artists from the film would.
And people were like amazed and mesmerized and like, this is weird, but it's kind of cool too.
It was incredible, and I just remember feeling, you know, wow, cinema can bring people together like this, and it's something that I hadn't experienced before.
first year we had a couple hundred people. Now we have like 500 to 600 people at a party.
I think they've just gotten better every year.
They just keep growing and growing and getting more creative and creative. And
You know, who else has a carnival ride in the middle of a party? That just doesn't happen anywhere else.
I'll never forget this one set he did. It was at Botanica, and he did a foam booth with all the birds attacking it. You could go in and do a selfie inside. It was great.
Never will forget the drag performers we had that they were in the middle of a table and they were serving desserts. And there was patrons there that had no idea that they were drag, but man, they did, and they had a good time.
Our Pan Am party and our Twistedly Mental party, it's probably our top two. Well, the Twisted Mental, our tagline that year was Get Twisted. So we had like a Twister theme and a tornado theme, and the Twisted Mental was more like everybody wanted to kind of have Halloween, so we ended up doing this mental hospital, and everybody sat on hospital beds and hospital things used for like food tables and gurneys. But the food would just keep rotating around the room. You wanted your meatballs, chase a gurney. The riskiest one we did, Naked City Magazine, they did a thing on food fetishes. So we ended up doing a party on fetishes, which was actually pretty successful. I was worried about my job on that one.
I'm always impressed at how they can find such different locations to do them in.
20 years ago when the festival first started, downtown Wichita had a lot of vacant buildings. So Tom and the crew had many a choice of where to go to have a unique party.
Tom finds these crazy places that like no one would have known even existed. And in a few years later, you find somebody bought that property and has made it into some cool new business.
I don't know how it would have turned out if Tim had been in charge. I think he probably would have, left after a couple of years and gone to New York or LA and started producing again. But he was a visionary, and that really carried through. And we all just flew on that vision.
He'd convinced us that this is something that Wichita wanted and could do. And we knew that in our hearts. So that's what we did. We moved forward.
That third year, Leela and Eric had to step into Tim's shoes.
We all just turned to her and said, "You got to do this." And she's like, "I've never, this is, what?" And we were all like, "Look, you know the industry, we don't. We can help you pull off a festival, we can help you find sponsors, but we don't know how to put the festival together."
This was a place that I had built the biggest community of arts lovers and film lovers, and I wanted to keep that going, and I wanted to be part of that. And it took a lot to build back up to that 4 to 5 day festival, but it was such a communal effort by so many incredible people that it wouldn't have happened without.
There's been some real stalwart supporters for us over the years. Kudos to them, because as sponsors, they didn't have to stay with us, and yet they did.
Tallgrass, at least among filmmakers in LA and New York and Chicago and other places, is now being pitched from filmmaker to filmmaker as you want to go there because it's summer camp for filmmakers. It's where you go to be yourself.
It is sui generis. There is nothing else like it.
Every festival has a story or two that we have originated or found.
We might have children named after us because of some of the filmmakers that would not leave our house or the bedroom during the festival. So
when people hear Wichita, they think of Tallgrass in the film world. That's really cool to be known as a destination for independent filmmakers from across the country and around the world.
Wichita needs the arts. It has opened so many people's eyes to so many issues.
This is something different. This is a different way to celebrate what Wichita has to offer and a different way to show Wichita off really to the world in terms of filmmaking.
What's the second coolest movie festival in our market? No disrespect to anybody else who's doing festivals, but there's a big gap between Tallgrass and whoever's in second place.
We got featured with a full article because Jeff Edgers, who had brought a film here, ended up doing a travel article about coming to Wichita, and it was published New Year's Day in the Boston Globe. I mean, you can't buy that kind of publicity.
It's hard to believe it's been 20 years, and it makes me feel old.
Festivals are kind of a terrible business model. But they're exciting to do. I don't have a better idea of how to do it.
It's truly wonderful that Tallgrass survived. And I think part of that stubborn independence was just like picking up when we fell down over and over and over again and getting to that place where, we're like, okay, now we've got this.
Small things have changed here or there, but the whole idea of making a film festival for the filmmakers is really still the mission.